Let's see how this looks. It doesn't look half bad, I guess. Blah, 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 blah. All right. With season 4 of HBO's Succession dropping any day now, I'm sure a lot of you, like me, are deep in a rewatch of the first 3 seasons. I've also been re-listening to and obsessing over Nicholas Britell's Emmy Award-winning main title theme. The relatively simple 4-bar theme that we hear in the opening credits is a feat of musical economy. Like a theme from a great symphony, a few well-chosen pitches and rhythms provide a ton of material for Britell to patiently explore and elaborate on throughout the series. Now, when I started planning this video, I originally intended just to make a 60-second short. But then shit happened, and so many interesting avenues opened up that I just had to explore. So in this video, we're gonna first do an analysis of Britell's memorable main theme, and in doing so, we're gonna touch on things like chromatic enclosures, the 5th mode of harmonic, minor, melodic contour, and more. But then we're going to have to dive deeper to explore where this earworm of a theme really came from. We're going to talk about Ludwig van Beethoven and his relationship with the key of C minor. We'll explore the 4-movement structure of classical symphonies and how that concept overlays on the 4 seasons of Succession. And finally, we're going to speculate on what we can expect to hear from the show's 4th and final season. This is Score Study with me, Brian Kroc.
Movement 1, Allegro ad nauseum, an exhaustive analysis of the Succession theme.
For those of you who are new to my channel, welcome. Get ready for altogether too much information. Musical analysis is an interpretive act and is entirely subjective, so what you're about to hear is just what I'm seeing, hearing, and feeling in this music. But feel free to let me know in the comments what you think, and I'd love to learn from you too. Also, I'm sorry I was gone for a minute, but I'm back, and I've got a lot of videos planned, so please click like and subscribe and stay up to...
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Succession's main title is deceptively simple and surprisingly dense, considering it boils down to just 4 chords and a 4-bar melody. In measure 1, we hear a heavily EQ'd piano play a C minor major 7 chord. This chord contains all the pitches of a C minor triad, C, E flat, and G, as well as the major 7th, which is a half step below, or a major 7th above the root note C.
There's this sort of immediate dissonance right from the top of the piece, which gives you this immediate sense that something is maybe potentially off.
And just like the Roy's corporate greed, that half step infects everything around it. We're going to see it in every single measure of this chunk of music. The melody that follows the C minor major 7th chord can be broken up into 3 discrete segments. So let's zoom in and look at the first segment of this melody. In measure 2, over an A flat major chord, we hear a melody that climbs up to a D before falling down to a G, which is enclosed by the half step below it and the half step above it, F sharp and A flat. This is something called a chromatic enclosure, because it's 2 notes enclosing the more important melodic pitch. And that F sharp, the lowest note of the melody, is a non-chord tone, so it's inherently dissonant, just like the B and C of the first measure. It rubs against the G of the second measure. Immediately after this chromatic enclosure, there's an octave leap. The second musical segment is then heard as sort of an imperfect melodic sequence. It's a G falling down to a D with another chromatic enclosure around that D. Again, the C sharp at the bottom of this melodic fragment is a non-chord tone. Then again, there is another dramatic, huge leap up an octave, just like in the second measure to the third measure. By repeating the first segment, Bertel has built up the listener's expectation, and he thwarts what we expect to happen by letting the fourth and final measure, or the third melodic segment, fall an entire octave. From D down to D. Now, if we zoom out again, we'll see a really interesting melodic contour. Melodic contour is essentially the shape of the melody. If you'll permit me to be a little overdramatic, I think the melodic contour of this melody mimics the arc of many of Succession's characters' development. It strives upwards, only to fall, thwarted by some unknown opponent. It then makes an even grander gesture upwards, only to fall again. And finally, the melody makes its most heroic attempt to burst upwards towards victory, only this time to be decisively defeated, falling all the way down to where it started. All along the way, dissonant tones create a feeling of unease. The journey has been full of unseemly blemishes. Okay, so now let's check out the chord progression that accompanies this striking melody. In measure 1, we hear a C minor chord, which is the tonic, the home key, the root chord, the 1 chord. Then we hear A flat major, the submediant, or the flat 6 chord, which is directly between the root and the subdominant. Now, instead of hearing the subdominant, which would be F minor, we get a variation of F minor. It's the 2 half diminished chord, D half diminished. But instead of D in the bass, it's in first inversion. So we have F in the bass. And then finally that moves to G major or G7, which is the point of most tension in this chord progression and needs to resolve down to C minor. You hear that chord progression all over the score to Succession. Now, this chord progression is an exceedingly common one, and it evokes the classical era of music more than anything else, the late 18th century to the early 19th century, essentially.
When I was first thinking about the type of music for the show, I was imagining for myself, what is the music that the Roy family might imagine for themselves? So there was this thought of, well, is there a kind of dark, courtly, classical music that might feel like it's related to them, that they would think of for themselves?
Whether consciously or not, it would seem that Bertel had Ludwig van Beethoven in mind when he was writing this music. Let me show you why.
Movement 2, Sturm und Drang, C minor, Sonata Pathétique, and musical drama.
Now, an overwhelming majority of the music in Succession is in the same key as the title music, C minor. And like a lot of you, I'm sure, when I hear classical-esque music in the key of C minor, I immediately think of Beethoven. Whatever. Most famously, his Fifth Symphony is in the key of C minor, an infrequently used key during the classical era, but one that Beethoven reserved for his most tumultuous and dramatic pieces of music. This part of his musical output fits into a literary and musical movement called
Sturm und Drang,
which literally stands for storm and stress. It was a movement where artists could feel free to express their most subjective, innermost turmoil. That's kind of Beethoven's whole thing. He was the prototypical turn of the 19th century sad boy. With that in mind, I went to good old IMSLP and started reading through the Piano Sonata number 8 in C minor, opus 13, known more famously as his Sonata Pathétique. As I slowly plodded my way through sight reading this piece, I immediately noticed a familiar melodic contour just 4 measures into its grave introduction. Now, I'm not even close to a Beethoven expert or even an expert on classical music, but when I heard that pa pa pa, pa 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 theme in the introduction to Succession, I mean, that sounds very Beethoven-y to me. So I wasn't at all surprised to find that exact figuration all over the Sonata Pathétique. However, I was very surprised when that melodic fragment I heard in the introduction was spun out into this melody in measure 113. This sonata is one of Beethoven's early piano sonatas. He wrote it when he was 27 years old. Yikes. And so while it is full of tons of progressive and exciting musical choices, it still adheres to sonata form. And even though I am by no means an expert on the matter, I remembered from school that this melody that I just played is part of the sonata's exposition, where the composer lays out the 2 main subjects that they will be exploring throughout the piece. This, the third part of the second subject of the exposition, is presented first in E-flat major, which is the relative major of the home key of the sonata, C minor. But in the classical style, during the recapitulation, we're going to hear that theme presented again in the home key of C minor. This theme is eerily similar to Bertel's main title music for Succession. Look at the chord progression. C minor, A flat major, D half diminished in first inversion, G major. Exactly the same. And look at the melody. 3 segments with the exact same melodic contour. Now, I don't think Bertel was cognizant of this striking similarity. I just think he's a dude who played a lot of classical piano and internalized this very popular sonata, which then came out, filtered through the lens of his own personal logic as he was working on music in Beethoven's very favorite key, C minor.
Movement 3, Scherzo, Successions, Seasons, Symphonic Structure.
As the 18th century drew to a close, Joseph Haydn developed the symphonic structure from a less formalized collection of often 3 movements into the iconic 4-movement structure that most people are familiar with today. All 20 symphonies that he composed between 1780 and 1800 feature a fast first movement, a slow movement, a minuet and trio, and a fast finale. Each of these symphonies' first movements establish the main key, with the internal movements modulating to related keys for changes in mood. For example, let's look at the only symphony also in C minor from this batch that Haydn wrote in 1782, his Symphony number 78. The first movement, marked Vivace, begins in the home key of C minor. The second movement moves to the relative major, E-flat major, and the third movement is in the parallel major, which is C major, before the fourth movement is finally back in the home key of C minor.
My instinct was actually to say, like, what if we imagined this show kind of as a symphony, and what if this is like the second movement of a symphony?
The vast majority of the music in Season 1 stuck to the very Beethovenian key of C minor, but when he set out to write his second movement, in other words, the second season of Succession, Bertel began by writing the rondo in F minor. You might first notice that the character of this new music is different. The tempo is slower, but the subdivision is 16th notes rather than 8th notes, creating a feeling of dark urgency. You'll also notice that this new music is in a different key. F minor, which is C minor's subdominant, an extremely typical key relationship between movements in a classical symphony. Now, beyond these surface-level observations, on closer inspection you'll find that the melody of rondo in F minor is related to the Succession theme on a cellular level. It features the major seventh or leading tone below the root, E natural. The downward scale on beat 4 of measure 2 has the same melodic contour as the segments of the main theme's melody, this time without the chromatic enclosure. Another way that composers differentiated between movements in a symphony in the classical era was by using different time signatures. So if we look back at the Haydn example, we'll see that its third movement is in 3/4 time. Bertel did something similar for the third season of Succession. The Furioso in F minor is in 12/8 time, and that time signature gives the music a new propulsion and a new rhythmic vibe. So there seems to be a pattern developing here, which you can't help but notice begs the question, what's going to happen in season 4?
Movement 4, finale. What will season 4 sound like?
So what can we expect to hear in season 4 of Succession? Now, although I'm sure Bertel wasn't happy by any means to find out that the show would be ending, I bet a part of him was kind of excited that it would so fatefully fit in the 4-movement symphonic structure. There are 4 movements in a symphony, and there will be 4 seasons of Succession, so that's kind of perfect. Here are some things that I personally would like to hear in season 4 of Succession. Typically, the 4th movement of a symphony is fast and exciting and full of drama. The music in Succession thus far has been mid-tempo and kind of chill. I hope that we get some faster, exciting, invigorating music in season 4. Also, I'd love to hear more chromaticism in this season. After all, chromatic enclosures and leading tones became part of the most important DNA of the music in the show. So it would make sense to me to play with even more chromaticism to build tension as the show builds towards a final denouement. Since the inspiration for season 3 looked backwards towards Italian Baroque music, maybe it would make perfect sense for season 4 to look forwards to maybe the Romantic era and Beethoven's late period music, which is full of lush chromaticism and uncertain, unstable tonal centers. One thing we can know for sure is that a lot of the music in season 4 of Succession will be back in the home key of C minor. The final movement of a symphony is all about a hero returning from their long journey, and after a period of change and growth, finding themselves where they started anew. 99% of symphonies end in the key in which they began. So I think it's safe to bet that Bertel will do the same. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you're still here, then please maybe consider checking out my Patreon page, or clicking like and subscribe, or doing something to support the channel. Check out my music. There's going to be links all down there.